Let's talk about the big artificial intelligence shift. AI's next phase could be a governance problem disguised as progress. There's a big shift from what the technology can do to how it should be governed. This transition, when control and oversight become more important than raw capability, defines the path forward. The railways faced it in the early 19th century with regulation, and the internet faced it in the early 2000s with governance challenges. Artificial intelligence is arriving at that same station now, and at its core, the key issue seems to be a governance problem masking itself as progress. Systems are improving, deployment is broadening, the technical frontier continues to move, but the more consequential shift is less visible. AI is ceasing to be a tool that organizations use and becoming part of the infrastructure through which they make decisions. Tools can be adopted incrementally, and once embedded decision infrastructures are there, they are much harder to unwind. The productivity promise is real, but it's incomplete. The economic case for AI is not difficult to sketch out. Tasks that once took us hours now take us minutes. Content production, data analysis, customer interaction, they've all been compressed by an order of magnitude we haven't seen before. Early adopters reported measurable gains, and that continues. In some cases, output has multiplied without a corresponding increase in headcount. And as we've seen more recently, reductions in headcount. History offers a precedent here. The spreadsheets didn't eliminate finance departments, but it did change their composition and their pace. The same can be said of enterprise software, probably more broadly. Productivity gains were real, even if unevenly distributed. Yet productivity, it's an ambiguous metric. It measures volume and speed, not necessarily value. An organization can produce more reports, more campaigns, definitely produce code, yet still fail to improve underlying performance. The assumption behind much of the current enthusiasm is that faster, increased output will deliver better outcomes. Early evidence suggests this may not always hold true. Marketing teams can certainly generate content at scale, but differentiation is harder when the competitor's output is powered by a similar model. In software, code generation accelerates but adds new verification and risk layers. The bottleneck, it shifts, it doesn't disappear. Efficiency, in other words, is not the same as effectiveness. From tools to embedded judgment, we need to think about what distinguishes this phase of AI. It's not simplicity, it's capability, but it's integration into decision-making processes we need to come back to. Recommendation systems already shape what consumers see, buy, and to some degree believe. Generative models extend that influence into areas previously considered more discretionary, strategy, creativity, and even elements of judgment. And this creates a subtle but important inversion. Instead of humans using tools to make decisions, organizations increasingly rely on systems that propose, filter, and sometimes determine the available choices. The risk is not that machines become autonomous in any dramatic sense, hopefully not yet. It is that human oversight becomes procedural rather than substantive. When a system produces 10 plausible options in seconds, the role of the human from creator shifts to curator. Over time, that can erode the very judgment that is meant to preserve. The history of automation suggests that this is not a hypothetical concern. In aviation, for example, the increasing reliance on automated systems has paradoxically made certain forms of pilot error more likely when those systems fail. Skills atrophy when they are not exercised. AI may introduce a similar dynamic into knowledge work. The governance gap widens. The question of who is responsible for these systems remains unsettled. Within companies, AI often sits somewhere, possibly uneasily, between many functions. Is it technical enough to fall under engineering or IT, but consequential enough to affect strategy, risk, brand? This ambiguity creates a governance gap. Traditional corporate structures are not well suited to technologies that cut across every function. The chief technology officer may oversee implementation, but not necessarily the ethical or strategic implications. The chief executive retains ultimate accountability, but may lack technical grounding to interrogate systems in detail. Regulators face a parallel challenge. Existing frameworks tend to be sector specific, while AI operates horizontally. Efforts to impose structures, whether in Europe, the US, or elsewhere, are necessarily reactive. By the time rules are codified, the technology, it's already moved on. And there's a temptation to treat this as a familiar lag between innovation and regulation. It's partly correct, but it understates the extent to which AI alters the object being governed. It's not a single product or service, but a layer that permeates many of them. The economies of scale favor concentration. Another tension lies in the economics of AI itself. Developing and training advanced models requires substantial capital. It requires access to data, specialized talent, and this creates a natural tendency towards a concentration among a small number of well-resourced players. OpenAI, along a handful of peers, occupies a position not unlike that of early cloud providers. Their systems become platforms on which others build. We see Gemini, we see Anthropic, we see many others. The benefits are clear: standardization, accessibility, and rapid diffusion of capability. But platform dynamics bring their own complications. Dependence on a small number of providers introduces systematic risk. Pricing power, control over access, and the ability to set technical standards all accrue to those at the center. The analogy with previous technological waves is instructive. The consolidation of cloud computing reshaped the economics of software. A similar pattern in AI would have implications not just for competition, but for the innovation itself. Startups may find it easier to build on existing models, but harder to differentiate from one another. The question is whether the current structure is a transitional phase or a more durable equilibrium. Marketing becomes the proving ground, I suppose. Few functions illustrate these tensions more clearly than marketing. Marketing often sits at that intersection of data, creativity, and customer engagement, all areas which are now subject to rapid AI-driven change. Generative systems can produce copy, imagery, and even strategic recommendations at really fast pace. Personalization engines can tailor experiences in real time. The promise is a level of precision and responsiveness that was previously unattainable. Yet marketing also depends on these elements that are hard to quantify: brand, tone, cultural awareness. When these are mediated through models trained on vast but often generalized data sets, there's a risk of homogenization. Distinctiveness becomes harder to sustain. And that's where the irony is. I mean, there's an irony here that the tools designed to enhance creativity may, if used uncritically, actually narrow its range. This is not an argument against adoption, far from it. It's an argument for intentionality. Organizations that treat AI as a means to amplify clear strategic thinking are likely to see benefits. Those who treat it as a substitute for that thinking may not. Long-term thinking in a short-term cycle is worth considering. Much of the current discourse around AI is framed in immediate terms: competitive advantage, cost reduction, speed to market. These are legitimate concerns, particularly in public markets that reward near-term performance. But the stronger effects of AI will unfold over much longer horizons. Labor markets will adjust, sometimes very unevenly. Organizational structures will evolve. Entire categories of work will be redefined. Investing in these transitions is less investing in these transitions is less straightforward than deploying a new tool. It involves training, cultural change, and in some cases, rethinking the boundaries of the firm itself. There is a familiar pattern in technology cycles. Early gains are often captured quickly. Deeper transformations take much longer and they're often more disruptive. The human element doesn't disappear. There's a recurring claim in discussions of AI that it will reduce the need for human input. In narrow context, this is already happening. Routine tasks are certainly being automated. Certain roles are changing or disappearing completely. But the broader picture is much more complex. As systems take on a more operational role, as they take on more operational work, the residual tasks tend to require greater judgment, greater context, and certainly greater accountability. Deciding what to build, how to position it, and when to intervene remain human responsibilities for now. In that sense, AI may increase the premium on precisely those skills that are hardest to codify. So the risk is not human irrelevance, but a less defined role. As decisions are distributed between systems and people, accountability can become very much diffused. That diffusion may prove to be one of the defining challenges of this current phase. An old question in a new form. There is tendency in moments like this to focus on the technology's novelty, and we've seen an awful lot of that, and that's understandable. The capabilities on display are, by anybody's reasonable standard, extremely impressive. But the underlying question, I would say, is an old one. Who decides how powerful tools are used and in whose interest? In previous technological areas, answers emerged through a combination of market forces, regulation, and occasionally crisis. There is little reason to think that this cycle will be any different in that respect. What is different, I suppose, is the speed at which the stakes are rising and the breadth of the domains affected.